Hey guys, it's Tim coming at you with a brand new Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite video for this week. And for this video, we're going to talk about the story mode that was announced for the game. Stories themselves in fighting games are nothing new. Even Street Fighter has a convoluted mess of a story itself, but usually it was told individually character by character as you completed the arcade mode. This more than often meant that you would get a variety of different contradicting endings that made it hard to completely discern what exactly the story of the game was outside of supplemental material. And while there had been strides in storytelling over time, really story modes in fighting games became popular when the Mortal Kombat reboot, also called Mortal Kombat 9, came out and people were pretty impressed by its story mode. And this basically set the basis for how story modes in fighting games would take place. You would take turns tagging between a variety of characters going forward through the story in order to play out different fights. Though this format itself was really more so presented first in Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe, but the game wasn't nearly as well received. And while story modes aren't really viewed as that important by the main demographic of fighting games, since they are mostly done for competition and are mostly a skill-based game, that does really help bring in casual audiences to have a story mode in your fighting game to give them something more to accomplish beyond just learning the different skills and getting good. And this eventually made its way back to Street Fighter, which, as I said before, is infamous for having a very confusing, hard-to-decipher story. Not as bad as BlazBlue, but in its own right still very confusing because of contradicting events. Which led to Street Fighter V having its first official story mode with Street Fighter V: A Shadow Falls, which was met with mixed reception. The writing wasn't great, but that's par for the course for Street Fighter. It really had a hard time focusing on particular things, and actually ended up focusing on things that weren't really all that important to the plot, like Karen, and it made one of the new villains of the game, Nikali, look like an absolute joke because of his inability to ever win a fight in the story. Now, these aren't necessarily only faults with Street Fighter's story mode in their game, because this is kind of a problem with fighting game story modes overall. Fighting games have a lot of characters who don't exactly figure into the overall plot of the story and are really only there to give variety to the different movesets and characters that you can play from. So a lot of the time when fighting games get story modes or get adapted into other things like anime, you have all of these characters who people like getting shoved in and mostly pushed to the sidelines because they have nothing to do with what's going on. The reason why I bring this up in terms of Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite is to ask the question, how exactly will their story mode be laid out? Because even though they're similar, Street Fighter V, which is Capcom's most recent fighting game story mode, is pretty differently structured than, say, Mortal Kombat 10's. The way that NetherRealm Studios typically structures their story modes is to break it down chapter by chapter to give one character each particular chapter, where they'll get a few fights in and then they'll switch to the next person. Though sometimes this means that you'll have a single character have more than one chapter in the story just because they want them to be in the story again. The main downside to this is that it makes certain characters look stronger than other characters due to their placement in the story, and the fact that since they have a limited roster, you're pretty much fighting solely against people who previously had chapters before you. So, in terms of Mortal Kombat 10, it makes Cassie Cage look like the strongest character, and makes Kotal Kahn look like a complete bitch. The way that Street Fighter V did it was to basically have you switch off to whichever character was currently fighting in the story itself, so this could lead to you having one character have a lot of fights in the story mode, have some characters have absolutely no fights in the story mode, and then have characters have 1 to 2 fights in the story mode, and it doesn't really balance that well. Now, while I like NetherRealm's style of letting you have time to play as every character you want to, just to get the chance to play as them whether they're important to the story or not, with as big a roster as Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite is likely to have, it's really not feasible to give all these characters all their own chapter. They could do it Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe style, where they had a DC side and a Mortal Kombat side, make it a Marvel side and a Capcom side, but even then you're going to have characters left out, but that's just inevitable, because as I said before, not every character in a fighting game is important to its story, it's just there to diversify gameplay. And we also have the question of how they're going to present these characters meeting up. Are they going to do it Subspace Emissary style, where everyone just exists in the same universe within the game's own continuity? Or are they going to do it Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe style, where the universes are merging the entire time? Honestly, it feels like they're going with the Mortal Kombat vs. DC Universe style of storytelling, especially with their combination villain from both sides. In interviews, they've mentioned the idea of worlds colliding, which makes it sound like the two universes coming together, but honestly, that's too vague to really mean anything at this point. The most we know about the story right now is that Mega Man X and Captain Marvel are going to feature heavily into the story. Honestly, my best guess right now is that it's going to have the universes colliding together, likely through the machinations of the Sigma Ultron figure who we've seen in the trailers, and likely through the use of the Infinity Gems. That's pretty vague, but we don't know a huge amount right now, and I mostly wanted to spend time talking about the ups and downs of storytelling in fighting games. And while I'm sure that Marvel will be heavily involved in the story of this game, since storytelling is their thing, there are always going to be ingrained problems to writing a fighting game story. But what do you guys think about this? How do you think the story mode is going to play out in this? How do you think it'll be structured? What do you think will happen in it? And what problems do you think we're going to see pop up from it? Well, as always, let us know down in the comments, and until next time, this has been Tim from the Hybrid Network, signing out.